Well, it is my great honor to introduce Professor Gary Wolfram from Hillsdale College. He has produced a book called the Capitalist Manifesto. I just watched a C-SPAN interview with Professor Wolfram and then spoke to him briefly, and the floor is yours, Professor Wolfram. Oh, before I do that, I need a sound sync. So could you put your hands up in front of the in front of your camera, and then clap once, exactly once. Can you hear me?
You want me to clap?
Yes, I want you to clap once. Okay, you were out of sync by a good 2 seconds, but we'll straighten that out in post-production. So thank you.
Okay.
The floor is yours. And can everybody hear? Can you hear us clearly?
I can hear you.
Okay. Let's do this. Let's everybody clap for Professor Wolfram. Thank you so much. And the floor is yours.
Okay. Probably the main thing to think about is how markets are able to allocate resources towards consumer wants. And Ludwig von Mises wrote in 1927 in a book called Liberalism in the classical tradition. He wrote about how markets are the only way to produce wealth for the masses. I mean, that was his concern. How do we create wealth for the masses? We tend to get sidetracked on inequality, as if that matters. It is inequality and issues that deal with inequality are what Mises called the politics of envy. We shouldn't really be worried that the richest person in the world is 1,000 times wealthier than the poorest. What we ought to be worrying about is how wealthy are the poor. And so that is what we need to focus on. And I think one of the things that economists or conservatives in general have failed to emphasize is that this is all about creating wealth for the masses. This is all about making it so the poorest among us are as wealthy as we can get them. And that comes about by having a system of voluntary exchange, which is what markets are about. I can't force you to buy anything. You can't force me to buy anything. I tell my students, you don't go to Walmart and they start throwing stuff in your cart and then charge you when you go to leave. Nor do you get to throw stuff in your cart and then at the end tell Mr. Walmart, I'm going to pay you $5. Nor, at least at Hillsdale, you don't have people driving around in vans capturing people and chaining them behind the counter at the Walmart. Anybody at the Walmart is saying, I'm happier being here than where else I could be. Because if I was happier someplace else, I'd be there. So you have to pay resources in general, but labor in particular. It's called their opportunity cost. What's the value of the next best alternative? Now, people who are poor don't have very high ability to produce for other folks, because that's sort of think about it. How do you get wealthy in a market system? There's only one way, and that's to make things for other people. You can't force them to buy stuff. I mean, Henry Ford thought he would have all sorts of people buying the Edsel. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Edsel, but that was going to be his signature vehicle to honor his son. Well, it turned out people didn't want to buy it, and so it basically just sat there. Although I did get a picture of one a while back, and so because I can't force you to buy something, I have to find out something you want. And I always use the point that in the Bible it says, do unto others as they would have you do unto them. But in a market system, that's just not good enough. You have to do unto others done unto them yet. Because if you're going to be innovative, then you're going to have to do something that people haven't done before. So, for example, I often ask people, and when I'm in front of an audience, I'll say, how many in here have ever used a Microsoft product? And all of them invariably will raise their hand. And I'll say, well, how many have ever paid to have me speak before? And very few of them will raise their hand. And I'll say, well, that's why Bill Gates is rich and I'm not. It's pretty simple, you know. And if you sort of think about it, why is it that the wealthiest among us are getting more and more wealthy? And the answer is because they can sell their product, they can please more people than they used to be able to. If this were 1978, Bill Gates could not sell his product, nor could Mark Zuckerberg sell his product to 1.3 billion Chinese. Nor could he sell it to another 1.3 billion Indian. But today, that's 2.6 billion people more that he can or they can provide a product that the other folks want. So what's going to happen? He's going to get way wealthier than when he could only sell stuff to, 300 million Americans and 500 million Western Europeans. I mean, you really think about it. Go back, you couldn't sell into the Soviet bloc very easily. So now with the world becoming more integrated, the wealthiest are going to get really wealthy. But the poor are going to get really wealthy as well. Because now they have more things to work with. If you are in, some of you might be old enough to remember what Made in Japan meant. When I was a kid, Made in Japan meant cheap, shoddy stuff made with cheap labor. And today, it means Lexus. And why did that happen? It happened because capital, that is what economists call capital, machinery, computers, things that are used to produce other goods and services, factories, capital moves to where there's low-wage labor. And so as the labor gets more capital, it can become more productive. There's the old story about, John Henry, the steel-driven man that gets outcompeted driving nails into the rail with some guy with a machine, okay? And as you get more machinery to work with, more intelligence to work with, you can produce a lot more. And so what we want is we want capital to flow to where there's labor. And that increases the value of labor. It increases the amount that you can pay them. And it increases their opportunity cost. That is, to get them to do something else, you now have to pay them more. So what happened in Japan was capital, machinery, factories, other things, all showed up in Japan. Their employees became more productive. They were able to buy more stuff. They got paid more. And the actually wage costs are higher in Japan than they are in the United States today. Same thing's happening in China. China, 1978, opens up in an experimental method, created some enterprise areas, and started to integrate themselves into the world economy. As that happened, capital began to flow into China. As capital flowed into China, then the Chinese became more productive and they became wealthier. So now, actually, if you look between 1980 and 2015, over 600 million people moved out of poverty in China. That is a testimony to market capitalism. What it did was it took hundreds of millions of people who were struggling and made it so that they could live a reasonable level of life. And it's very useful to get either Heritage or the Fraser Institute's Index of Economic Freedom. They both rate countries as to how closely they resemble a free market system. And if you look at the Index of Economic Freedom, it is obvious that countries that are capitalist, they're poor or wealthier. In fact, you're in the bottom 25% of the income, if you're in the bottom 25% of those countries in the index of economic freedom, and you look at those with the poor in the top 25% of economic freedom, the poor are 11 times wealthier in those countries that are in the top 25% of economic freedom. And you really don't need data to tell this. If I just say to you, okay, you're going to be born anywhere you want. I'm going to place you to where you want to be born. And you can pick any country in the world. But the proviso is you're going to be the poorest person there. You don't say, oh, good, send me to North Korea, send me to Cuba, send me to Venezuela, right? Send me to Dominican Republic of Congo. You say, send me to someplace that's in the top 25% of index of economic freedom. Right? Send me to Canada, send me to the United States. And so that is just an indication of how obvious it is that markets produce wealth for the poorest. And we don't emphasize that enough. We tend to say things like, oh, they're very efficient or whatever. But what really should be emphasized is this system creates wealth for the masses. Now, you can also look at it historically. And you can say, well, you know, I ask my students, what would you rather be? King of England in 1263 or yourself? And living in Michigan in the winter, they prefer indoor plumbing, and so they say, I'd rather be myself. And so why are we so much wealthier than the wealthiest people in England in the 13th century? And it's because they had a different system. They operated under feudalism. And that system did not reward innovation. That system relied on central planning. The system had the economic and political power concentrated either in the guilds in the towns or the lords on the manor. And it was based on custom and prediction, all very different than how markets work. Markets are extremely dynamic. They're based on decentralization of the power to make decisions. And they're a system of well-established property rights. And so if you look at it cross-sectionally, if you look at it historically, and then if you just look at it logically, what other system would you organize yourself where you said, gee, the only way you can get ahead is to do something for other people. And the more people you can please, and the greater that you can please them, the wealthier you're going to get. In a sense, it's a very moral system. As I said before, you can't just do unto others what they would have, you do unto them. You got to come up with the iPhone 9 or the Xbox 390 or something. In fact, I was showing my IT guy. I have on my shelf the magnetic tape that I used when I was getting my PhD at Berkeley. It had my dissertation date on it. It's a big round magnetic tape that had taped on on pieces of board and stick it through this card reader, and it would tell the guy to go find your magnetic tape and hang it and spin it. And today, you have in your pocket a computer that is 100 times more powerful than the computer that I was using getting my PhD, and that wasn't that long ago in terms of history of the world. So why are we getting all this innovation? We're getting all this innovation because A, there's an incentive to do it, and B, people are free to do it. If this were the Middle Ages, you couldn't decide that you were going to try to innovate on this unless you had some authorities that was a group of scientists that were saying, okay, you can do that. That doesn't work that way in a market system. The last point I want to make is about liberty and how it's related. If you look at Hayek's book, The Constitution of Liberty, which he wrote in 1960, or if you look at a paper that he wrote in 1946 called The Use of Knowledge in Society, the main thing that he points out is that information is decentralized. That is, only you know what kind of toothpaste you're going to want tomorrow. Only you know what kind of toilet paper you're going to want. If you want double ply or single ply or whatever kind of toilet paper you're going to want. And there is no way for a central planner to gather up all that information and match the resources with the products that you value. It doesn't matter how massive your data processing is. In fact, one of the guys that got his PhD a couple years ahead of me at Berkeley, Hal Varian, is chief economist at Google. And his whole field was on gathering big data and analyzing data, but still no way that a central planner could possibly know how many hot dogs are going to be needed anywhere. I tell my students, I say, look, 9 million people woke up in New York City today, and there was exactly the right amount of Starbucks coffee, and the exact right amount of bagels, the exact right amount of tomatoes, and everything else. How in the world does that happen? We don't ask that question of people. If you just ask somebody that let's say they're a Bernie Sanders supporter, who was a very nice guy, but if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, what if somebody came up to you and said, hey, how is it that this worked? And it happened yesterday, and it's going to happen tomorrow, and it happened in New York, it happened in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Baltimore, Maryland. How in the world does that work? And then they have to start thinking about how that works. And it cannot be that, there's some minister of consumer goods that is allocating this stuff to every retail outlet in America. What happens is the price system is what makes that work. And your ability to trade with one another, that's what makes that work. And, we need to focus more on the marvels of the market system. Every day, I tell my students, every day you should just wake up and say, oh my gosh, this is incredible. That, there's no lines for Starbucks coffee in Baltimore today. There's no people throwing out Starbucks coffee. There's too much of it in Cleveland. We should just really be amazed at that, and we're not. So the focus of my book, Capitalist Manifesto, is to get people to realize this and to explain how this works. How does it work that prices set, the demand and supply tend towards equilibrium. The pricing system that provides a signal to demanders and producers. And we all know that, right? If there's too much of something, we know prices are going to start falling. And if there's too much of it, if there's too little of something, prices will start rising. And if there's too much of it, prices will start falling. My wife just got a ticket to Hamilton. And she managed to get it because she had some connections and got it at face value for $229. But if she tried to buy that on StubHub today, it would cost her $1,500 because the demand for ticket greater than the supply, and so the price keeps rising until somebody says, you know what, I'd really like to see Hamilton, but $1,500 is a little too much for me. So with that, I think I'd like to leave it open to questions. Anybody has one?
Okay, we have Scott. Then, you know what? I'm going to do this backwards. Kate organized this in part, so Kate goes first.
Go for it.
Gary, I have run into some young people around here who have thrown out the line when they are dissatisfied with something. Well, that's capitalism for you. And I would just like your advice on throwing a line back. We're not going to have a big conversation, but when someone says that as the reason for the, that's capitalism for you. What might I say to someone who makes that statement?
Well, first of all, why do you care that they're throwing the wine away, right? Whoever sold them that wine paid their employees, the grapes were grown. It was, whatever they do to wine to make it wine in the winery. All those people were happy to do that and receive paid for the wine. And if they want to drink it, that's fine. If they want to give it away, that's fine. If they want to throw it on the ground, then, as long as it's their ground, they can do that. The real issue is that people tend to think that the wealthier just getting that way because of greed, and that is not true. It's not greed. We heard this, that greed is good. Greed is not good. Mother Teresa was not greedy, but she was self-interested. She was trying to make herself better off, and she made herself feel better off by taking care of the poor, and it is not that you need to want a lot of stuff. If we all decided that we wanted to follow Jimmy Buffett and just, move down to the Bahamas and live in a shack, that would be fine. Market capitalism would allow that. It's not the capitalism that's the issue. The issue is, maybe you say, okay, this person's just being a jerk, okay? That's what they're really saying, right? When they say this person didn't like it, so they just threw the wine away or whatever, they're just being a jerk. And they could be a jerk whether they're capitalists or not.
We just lost audio. Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, so we're back.
Okay.
It's Scott, and then Ralph, and then Bill. But Scott, I'm going to ask for your indulgence for a second to cut in front of you. May I?
Certainly.
Thank you. I want to pursue the question that Kate raised, and she was asking something profound, which is that those who oppose a free market can throw out lines that make some sort of sense in the short run but make no sense in the long run. And so Kate was asking, is there some retort that is short that is effective? The people here are attending the Libertarian Lunch, which is hosted by the Libertarian Party, and we're looking for arguments that don't take a half an hour to explain a 5-second complaint. Do you have some short rejoinder that makes that would move the political needle? Thank you, Scott.
Like I said, poor. Who gains from capitalism? It's the poor that gain. And you can, and I think you can focus a lot on how the poor gain from this, and just, you ask them, would you rather live in the feudal system, or how about Venezuela? It's a socialist system. Do you want to be the poorest person in Venezuela? How do you get rich? The only way you get rich in a market system is to please other people. Those sorts of lines. Or ask them, how is it that there's exactly the right amount of Starbucks coffee in every retail outlet in America, and the right amount of toilet paper in every retail outlet in America at every moment in time? How does that work? And their intuition is going to be, hey, what if we made a minister of pencils? Ask them, okay, how about we make the secretary of pencils to make sure that pencils are produced and there's exactly the right amount of pencils at every retail outlet in America at every moment in time. They won't have an explanation for how you can do that.
Scott, and then Bill.
I have 2 points, one of which relates to this same issue. The first is that everything you said about products in relation to capitalism and so on also applies to services, and I think you should include that. It's why healthcare is not a right, and it's not really a product, but it works in a capitalist system because services work the same way as is that I tend to think of things philosophically and at base and that the reason, if you want a simple reason of why capitalism works and socialism or central planning and top-down doesn't work, is that capitalism has a means of self-correction, and government or socialism or top-down central planning does not have a means of self-correction.
Yeah, but economists tend to include goods and services together in goods. So yeah, whatever I say for goods is in fact equally the same for services, other than healthcare is not a service that is produced by the free market. I mean, healthcare has been heavily regulated and even more so regulated. And that is one of the reasons that we have so much problems in healthcare. You know, I asked my student, okay, you're going to go out and get a job. Are you going to ask them if they're going to have benefits? And they'll say, yeah. They say, oh, well, you ask them, will they provide, will they pay for your car insurance? Will they pay for your fire insurance? Will they pay for your renter's insurance? No. Will they pay for your health insurance? Yeah. Well, why is that? Why is it health insurance? And it actually in one of the one of the Hillsdale College online courses called, I think it's called The Constitution and Controversies or something like that. I do the lecture on healthcare. But the bottom line is, healthcare got to be associated with or tied to your job because of wage and price controls in World War II, and then the ruling under the Income Tax Act, the IRS ruled that this was not income if they paid for your health insurance. And so the bottom line is your health insurance starts to reflect what the employer or anyone else wants, whoever's paying for it. So Medicare, Medicaid became government insurance companies because those people aren't working. And then you have, what happens if I lose my job? Well, what if I've got a pre-existing condition? Then I can't go out and get a job, get coverage for something I already have. So then we have to have, everybody has to buy insurance, and that's how you ended up with the Affordable Care Act. Because it's what Mises talks about, unintended consequences. Once the government intervenes, it causes unintended consequences that lead to further government intervention. And health is just a very overregulated industry. The real question is, how do you take care of people who are indigent, one way or the other? Now, Hayek in The Road to Serfdom wrote a chapter where he suggested that people may be afraid to be free, and therefore you need to have some form of social safety net. The question then is, where does it end? But I wrote if you Google Gary Wolfram Scrooge, you'll actually get some. And it's an article that I wrote where I quote from A Christmas Carol, where they come in and ask Scrooge, will you help us out and give some money to this charity? And his answer is, are there no poorhouses, which is their welfare program. And then he goes on for 2 paragraphs talking about, hey, the government's supposed to take care of all this. I don't have to take care of it. And that is something that is what market capitalism does, is it said, yeah, you're supposed to take care of the indigent. You're supposed to take care of them. Because if they can't be productive, then somebody's got to help them. And that's got to be you. And if it's otherwise, it's what Bastiat called false philanthropy. It's not philanthropic when someone takes your property and turns around and gives it to their favorite charity. They're not philanthropic. You're not philanthropic. The only way you can have true philanthropy is to go out and give stuff away. So people don't have a right to health care. But if we're going to live in a free market system, we need to be philanthropic. We need to say, yes, we should be taking care of these people. And, Bill Gates' foundation gives away, billions of dollars or whatever. In fact, if you look at what the most philanthropic countries are, they're ones that are market capitalists. I mean, one of the problems with Russia is after it moved out of the Soviet Union, people don't want to be philanthropic.
Okay, Bill is next.
Yeah, so I guess the Ron Paul answer to the question about this is capitalism is that, how do we get back to capitalism? Because what we have today is not. And in fact, when people think about capitalist, and especially in terms of your wealth inequality, they think of Jamie Dimon being a billionaire this year, and Blankfein, and the people that are on the spigot of the Federal Reserve, and they call this the fact that the government's printing money and giving it to their favorite people, and those people are getting rich at the expense of the rest of us, and they still call that capitalism. I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. If you talk about crony capitalism, the problem is not that the wealthy are wealthy. The problem is that you have a government that can do lots of stuff. And when you have a government that can do lots of stuff, then it's everybody's incentives. I'm not going to blame Jamie Dimon for coming in and trying to get the government to do stuff for him if that's what the rules of the game are. People respond to incentive. In the law, Bastiat said, when the government can engage in legalized plunder, the plundered classes will attempt to engage in the making of the law by violent or other means. Now, he had just seen 2 recent revolutions in France, but we don't have the plundered classes engaging in making the law by violent means. You hire lobbyists. You can't say, oh, these people are bad because they're using the government to make themselves better off. The problem is government is able to make them better off. And what we need to do is to go back to limited government, which libertarians are about. The focus should be on, if government is limited, I can't get wealthy by doing things for the government. Look at Venezuela. How do you get wealthy? By being in the government somewhere. How do you get to be wealthy in North Korea? Do something that engages you with the government. And it's not that capitalism's the problem. The problem is government that engages in legalized plunder. That's the problem. And Bastiat, even in 1850, said that. He said, you know what? You don't expect the legislator to go in there if the government's engaging in legalized plunder. Don't expect the legislator to not try to get involved in it. And that's really something that we need to focus more. Well, libertarians are good at focusing on that. I think you might use the idea that how do we make it so that big business doesn't get a hold of big government?
And this is Book TV on C-SPAN 2, 48 hours of nonfiction books and authors every week.
1 second, sir.
And from time to time, we like to visit college campuses and talk with professors who are also authors. We're on the campus of Hillsdale College in Michigan today, and we're visiting with Professor Gary Wolfram.
Okay, sorry about that. Somehow, and I didn't do it. It's just, it's very rich Windows 10.
I guess I had a follow-up. I got the advice from somebody to never use the phrase crony capitalism, because if you're a champion of capitalism and you're putting an adjective onto capitalism, then you're criticizing capitalism. Just go ahead and call it cronyism. So I don't know what you think of that suggestion, but I like that one.
No, I think that's a good idea. Because people don't understand what capitalism is, right? And I always say capitalism is a system that's based on voluntary exchange. It is a system where you have private property rights, and a system where government is there to protect property rights. And that's what capitalism is about. And the idea that capitalism is about people getting rich or whatever, it's not. the advantage of capitalism is that the only way to get rich is to help out poor people, right? Because how many people, you're not going to get rich making stuff for rich people. There's not enough of them. When everybody has a cell phone in their pocket, then Apple's going to be making a lot of money. If you're only making cell phones for the 100 richest people in the world, then you're not going to get rich. So every incentive of capitalism is to do stuff for the poor. It's also an incentive to make them more productive, right? Because if I'm a capitalist, I'm going to seek out low-wage labor, and I'm going to give them either physical capital or human capital, which what economists call human capital, which is where you give them training, give them education, and that makes them more productive. So, yes, cronyism would be, yes, a good way to shorten that, to say, look, here's the problem. It's cronyism. It's the fact that you can get ahead only by doing something that creates a problem with other people.
Anybody else before I jump in with my slew of questions? Okay. How do you feel about unions?
Unions are fine. If a group of folks want to get together and form a union and say, you've got to negotiate with us, that's fine. But you shouldn't have laws that say, oh, I have to, if I'm an employer, I have to negotiate with this union, or if I'm going to get a job, I have to join the union. If people want to get together in any way they want, God love them, that's great. But they should have government regulation that gives them an advantage over other people, or gives them an advantage over the other folks that are working for the same company or different companies, or gives them an advantage over consumers. It's not the unions that are a problem, but the Labor Relations Act is the problem.
Unions have argued that where they exist, their workers make more money. Therefore, everybody should be unionized. Care to comment on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, think about this. We tend to make things a little too complicated. I can't pay you more than the value of what you produce. If you're only going to produce $8 an hour worth of stuff, I can't pay you $10 an hour. I'll go out of business. Okay? Companies that lose money on every unit of output, they go out of business. So, unions can't artificially make workers more productive. They can in the short run, because of the way the laws are. They could in the short run make it so that because they can exclude entry. If you exclude entry, you can bid up the price. But when you bid up the price, what happens? People find substitutes. We manufacture more automobiles in the United States than we ever have, but we only use about a third of the labor that we did. Because why? Because unions do raise wages in the short run by excluding entry into that labor market, but there's substitutes for that. And it's the exact same thing with minimum wage, right? I mean, the minimum wage saying, I want to make it illegal for anyone in America who cannot produce $15 an hour worth of product, I want to make it illegal for them to work. And what do unions do? By artificially reducing the supply of labor, they make it so that there's a substitution for capital. I'm going to invent a robot. And once that robot's there, you can't uninvent it.
Anybody else? Bill?
Well, you brought up the minimum wage, and I appreciate that. I just recently heard somebody saying that now that Seattle's got their minimum wage at the $15 level, restaurants are rapidly going out of business, and one or two other places that restaurants are going out of business very, very quickly. I don't know if you've observed that or if you had any comments on it.
Yeah, I mean there's lots of articles showing how minimum wage has been causing restaurants to go out of business, but not all out of business, because what will happen? You'll walk into the restaurant, and some restaurants are already doing this. You walk in, and instead of someone taking your order, you punch into some sort of pad what you want. You can Google Burger King robot, and Burger King is developing a robot that will make hamburgers, flip them. There are robots that they're making that actually come out and interact with you. And so if you, again, just like the unions, artificially raise the wage, you can't possibly make it so that I somehow now can pay more than the value of what you produce. So what will happen? I'll have A, there'll be less of us producing, and B, those that are producing will use less labor. And the problem is, who loses from that? Look, my kid isn't going to be affected at all by the minimum wage, because he'll get a job. In fact, he had a job last summer, and he got paid $0. And the way he got paid $0 was that was called an internship with one of the state senators here in Michigan. Now, is that single mom of 3 kids in the city of Detroit, are her kids going to get internships? No. And so who's really harmed by this is that single mom in East Los Angeles working at the garment factory right now. She's losing her job. And that we need to, who loses in the minimum wage? Some people gain, right? Because they're working gains. The question is, who's not working? Who's not getting that first job? And when you can't get that job, you can't increase your human capital. And who's that? Those are people that are in public schools that are bad. There are people who come from broken homes. These sort of folks, they lose under the minimum wage.
Anybody else before I jump in? Yana.
Hi. I'm just wondering what you think about the situation in higher education, and you happen to be a professor. And obviously, we have prices grown exponentially, and I've been here 30 years. I grew up in Romania in communism, where they planned how many people become engineers and all those things. And as far as I know, in Western Europe and most countries, it still works that way. But they're coming to this country, and I pay student loans for a long time, and then I went to graduate school. I couldn't even pay the interest on my loans, and there are people who got grants also paid for by Americans from other countries. And I'm from another country. I don't have anything against them, but what I'm saying is they come from other countries without student loans, they go to grad schools, and they have a better chance of being successful because they don't have all these loans, and the prices is just obvious. Most people I talk to, that the quality didn't grow with the expense, with the cost of education, and it's mostly federally funded, as far as I know, way more than half. And in addition to that, we have all the student loans. That's only, I don't know, way less than half of the cost of the budget. It's something 20-30% from what I heard.
Gary, were you able to hear that?
Yeah, actually I have, I published a study for the Cato Institute a number of years ago on this very issue. I actually published 2 studies on higher education with them, I think 2009 or something like that. Anyway, if you get on cato.org and look for Gary Wolfram, I have two studies that I did. And one of the obvious things is that when the federal government goes out and it gives money to certain people to go to school, 2 things happen. One is a lot more people go to school that are going, you're going to go to school if you get $100 out of value out of school if you have to pay the $100. If you only have to pay the $50, you're going to go to school if you only get $50. So what we do is, and actually Jim Buchanan won the Nobel Prize in the night, exactly when. He wrote a book in 1968 pointing this out, that you're going to get people going to college and universities that are just using it as a consumer good because they don't have to pay for it. But on top of that, it begins to drive up the price, right? Because if the government gave a subsidy to everybody to buy new cell phones, what would happen? The demand for cell phones would shift to the right, the price of cell phones. Now, in higher education, it's difficult to increase the supply very quickly. And so what happens is all this federal government funding of higher education misallocates resources, and it drives the price up. And those people who don't get the loan or don't get the subsidy, what happens? They face higher prices than they otherwise would have. And it's a very large distortion in the market that causes all sorts of problems, as you mentioned. People out there going to college that probably aren't going to get the value out of that college, that the cost that was used to produce that service, but it doesn't matter because they're being subsidized for it. And one of the reasons that, interesting, Hillsdale College, right, doesn't take any federal money. We don't take students, can't use federal money or state money actually at Hillsdale. And one of the interesting things is we have a default rate on our student loan of less than 0.5%, because people know who's giving them the loan, and they would feel bad if they didn't pay it back. And when the government is giving you the loan, you're not going to feel bad about not paying it back. So there's a whole misallocation in that higher education market. There's a very good book by a guy named Richard Vedder, Vedder. It's called "Going Broke by Degree," and Richard has written on this extensively. But that book sort of summarizes these arguments.
Do you have any suggestions of how can we improve on that in financing higher education?
Yes, actually Milton Friedman suggested this in 1962, and he called them human capital contracts. And the way it would work is that, let's say I am Bill Gates and I'm looking for people to work for Microsoft. What I would do is I would go out and I would pay for your higher education, and in return, you would work for me for 4 years or 5 years or whatever. Or you could do it where I might be willing to say, you know what, I think these kids are going to be more productive if they go to college. Here's what I'll do. I will pay your college tuition, and then I will take a fraction of your earnings over the next 10 years or whatever. And those human capital contracts would make sense, right? Because if I'm the student, and once I'm employed, I don't have an incentive to say, oh, gee, I got to give 10% of it away to this guy, so I'm going to work for less. You want to work for more, right? Because you're still going to get 90% of whatever you work for. And so the incentives of that system would be, I'm a kid that's in 8th grade in Detroit public schools, and I got a single mom, and there's 4 of us in the family. Somebody might come along and say, you know what, I'm going to pay for your high school and college, or I'm just going to pay for your college. You can go to the public high school, but I'm going to pay for your college, and in return, you're going to pay me a certain fraction of your earnings. Now, you do have a problem in that these kids are under age of 18, so how far can you go down? But nonetheless, certainly if you're 18, you could enter into, and you know what, maybe it'd be better off if people started college when they're 20 instead of 18. The market would start to determine how that would work. And so Milton Friedman suggested that in the 1960s, and I think that would work. I'd have an incentive, and even if you could start to see what would happen is that someone might put together a mutual fund that would fund, 300 kids, and you would buy a share in that mutual fund, and the mutual fund would pay for 300 kids to go to school, and then it would take some of the earnings from those 300 kids, and that would go towards paying you as dividends. You could think of a lot of innovative financing that would come out of such a system.
Bill.
Yeah. Regarding student loans, I understand there's a bill now to allow student loans to be discharged through bankruptcy. I'm in favor of that, just because of founding the country, we had debtors' prisons, and getting people out of debtors' prisons was one of the things that got the country started. And a student loan that you can't get out of except for by dying seems to be a little too harsh. And we have a lot of discussions here about the moral danger of doing that. I'd love to get your comment on allowing them to be discharged through bankruptcy.
You do have this moral hazard problem. That is, maybe I'm young, I'm 23, why don't I just declare bankruptcy and get it discharged and move on? The problem is, as with anything, let's just take the Affordable Care Act as an example. You've got this situation that you've created with all this government intervention that it's very difficult to wind your way out of it. You're now in student loans, you have over $1 trillion in student loans that are sitting out there. How do you wind your way out of the existing ones? I think you got to start with not having new ones come in. You got to start with innovative mechanisms to fund higher education. And I do think the problem in higher education is the inability to have people invest in your human capital, in your business. If you were to start a little coffee shop, there'd be a mechanism for you to borrow in order to get the coffee shop started. There's got to be better mechanism than the way the federal government has disrupted the lending process in higher education. So, yes, I think that's a hard problem of how do you deal with, you got a lot of people out there that have taken on more debt than they can afford. You might have some limited bankruptcy. It's probably some mechanism where you don't allow complete bankruptcy, but you allow it to be paid back in a different fashion or with some other mechanism.
Well, I guess I would push Rothbard's button and say, boom, you go ahead and say it's bankruptcy, and then within 2 months there would be no more student loans. So I don't think you'd have to have long to wait to stop the new student loans if you did allow them discharge in bankruptcy.
Yes, if the government stops handing it out, look, the private sector would not be handing out these loans, right? That's why the government's doing it. So you're right that if this were just put back into the private market, nobody would be giving out new loans. But you created the feeling that higher education is a right. Just listen to Hillary Clinton. The state of New York was talking about having higher education be free for everyone. That is a major problem in this issue of everything becomes a right, but you gotta produce it somehow. And there's no discussion about, how are you going to do that? How are you going to produce higher education if nobody's paying for it? Or how are you going to produce health care if nobody's paying for it?
More questions, so let me start with this. Do you agree that free education at the elementary school level makes sense?
It's sort of interesting. You can go back to John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, and part of the problem with K-12 education in particular is that if I'm a 5th grader, I don't really have an ability to say, oh yeah, Mom, I want to go on to 6th grade. Or have a mechanism that if my mom and dad don't say, if my mom and dad don't put me in 6th grade, I don't have a way to get around that. So I think, but there's a big difference between government provision of education and government production of education. Government production of education is a dangerous prospect because Hayek said in the Constitution of Liberty, democracy only makes sense if you can form an opinion independent of your government. And if the government is running your education system, why would it tell you, yeah, it's not a good idea to have government expanding into this area or that area because of the great unintended consequences? The government's not going to say that. And so I guess I don't have a, I guess I lean more towards some form of tuition tax credits or some form of maybe a voucher system, although Hillsdale College, doesn't take it at the higher education level. You might want to do that at the K-12 level because the students don't have the wherewithal to make decisions on that. But that's a tough question. If we're going to provide K-12 education, though, it should not be produced. It should be provided where you get the ability to go buy in the private sector or whatever product you're going to choose.
Anybody else? No, I'll keep going.
I can take about 5 more minutes.
Okay, then for that 5 more minutes, I want to say, Professor Wolfram, thank you so very, very much. I think we owe Professor Wolfram, at minimum, a huge round of applause. Would you call yourself an Austrian economist?
Yes, I would. I mean, the Austrian school of thought has a resurgence. All you got to do is get on YouTube and watch the rap video, Hayek versus Keynes. It's got, I don't know how many, a couple million at least, which tells you that a lot of people are engaged in that. And because the Austrian business cycle theory has worked very well in explaining the Great Recession. And the Great Recession, in fact, in my book, the last chapter in my book, and the last, if you get on the Econ 101 online course at Hillsdale, lecture number 9 is discussing the Austrian business cycle theory. And the Austrian school focuses on the ability of markets to create wealth for the masses, and how government is necessary, but it's necessary to be limited. And so I would say, yeah, I'm in that realm, and I would recommend Mises' book, Liberalism in the Classical Tradition. It's short. You can get it free from Mises.org to anybody. I have my students read it. I refer to it in my book. And then Hayek Road to Serfdom is very good as well, in 1944. And so I would say those are 2 good places to start in Austrian business cycle theory. Oh, there's a book, Micro Foundations of Macroeconomics by Steve Horowitz, that is very good in addressing this Austrian view of macroeconomics.
And with that, I want to say thank you, Professor Wolfram. I realize you have to leave. I could have kept you going for another hour at least.
I'm sure.
So again, thank you so very, very much. This has been wonderful, and I hope you have enjoyed this. My last question is, would you consider yourself a libertarian?
I would consider myself, I mean, it depends on what people say as a libertarian. I do believe that there is a role for government in the protection of property rights. I'm not a very Rothbard type libertarian. But, you know, I think government should be limited to protection of life, liberty, and property. And but I also believe that people do need to take care of other people. We are our brother's keepers. We need to volunteer. We need to be charitable. And the interesting thing is, I out as well, is that the only way that you can be philanthropic, the only way to be charitable, is if you're allowed to do it of your own volition. Once the government starts doing it, it creates an uncharitable country.
I'll leave with a comment about that. About I don't know, 6, 7 charity tax. And I railed against it because you can't have a charity tax.
Cannot have a charity tax.
You know, charity is voluntary. If it's a tax, it's government. Again, let's give Professor Wolfram a great round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.